Our goal today really is to get into this whole idea of making versus taking photos and, how tech changes things and that link between pictures and memory.
Yeah, it's a really rich topic. And looking at these specific points you raise, well, it lets us get into the real nitty-gritty, doesn't it? Beyond just the surface level.
Okay, so first up, this line really stood out. Your eyes always take the best pictures. Let's unpack that a bit. You then make this distinction between just a quick snapshot and what you call a more intense photographic image, something that maybe takes time or gains weight over time, like documentary photos. What's the core idea there?
Well, I think it's fundamentally about passive versus active looking.
Yeah.
Our eyes are constantly doing this incredible filtering job, deciding what's important. A quick snap often doesn't have that same level of engagement, that intense image, whether it's like carefully constructed or just gathers meaning through history. It carries a different weight, a deeper intention maybe. So really seeing with intent, that's the bedrock, long before you even pick up a camera.
It's that difference between just, glancing and really looking, observing.
Exactly.
And that leads us straight into technology's role. You use this great analogy, tech as a lens, like eyeglasses, changing perception. And then you zoom right in on the smartphone, our basically 21st century tool for documenting, well, everything.
Yeah, and think about eyeglasses, right? They didn't just correct vision. They fundamentally altered how people interacted with text, with detail. The world, really.
Yeah.
The smartphone's done something kind of similar for image making. It's put this power, this potential to document into nearly everyone's hands, a scale we've just never seen before.
And then you connect this to that Polaroid exhibition example, which sounds fascinating, showing just the backs with the handwritten notes.
Right.
And you make this leap, which I found really interesting, to modern text-prompted AI, this idea of cameraless image creation, where the caption basically makes the image and the AI is just the projector. That's quite a connection.
Well, it's about where the creative spark originates, isn't it? With the Polaroids, those notes weren't just labels. They kind of ignited the viewer's imagination. They projected the unseen photo. Now with AI, you type the words and bam, there's the image. The text directly creates it. So in both cases, weirdly, the image itself comes from something other than, light hitting a sensor directly. The idea or the prompt has this immense creative force. It makes you question what photography even is anymore as the tech keeps evolving.
It really does muddy the waters, doesn't it? So, okay, everyone's got a camera now, and you ask this question: should we just snap a picture of anything interesting we see? And you float this idea that images can sort of gain relevance later on.
Yeah, and that hits on the sheer volume of images now. Taking a picture is almost like breathing. For some people, It's automatic.
Right.
But asking why we're clicking, that's important. Some snaps might seem totally trivial now, but years down the line, context changes, personal meaning attaches, like old family photos, often not great photos technically, but priceless because of the memories they trigger.
Then you explore this other intriguing idea, taking photos of seemingly uninteresting or boring things, suggesting the real value might be in something happening outside the frame, an observation made without focusing on the visual directly. Can you say more about that?
This is where paying attention really matters. A photographer might be drawn to something plain, not for what it is, but for the story it implies, the context surrounding it, just outside the picture plane. It's about sensing those invisible threads, the environment that gives a mundane subject some resonance. Like a photo of an empty chair on a porch. It's not about the chair, is it? It's about who sat there, who's coming back.
Yeah.
The unseen story.
Yeah. The implied narrative. That makes total sense. And this flows really well into your distinction between taking and making photos. Cameras take them, sure, but making them, that's more rigorous, you say. What does that rigor involve?
Well, making usually implies more deliberate thought, right? Planning, maybe. A deeper kind of engagement with the subject, with the process itself. It could be about super precise composition or really thinking about light or having a whole concept behind the image. It's moving past just recording what's there to actively, shaping or interpreting reality through the camera.
And then you bring in this comparison that kind of surprised me. Photography is very much like painting, even though, as you also say, it was first seen as painting's replacement. What's the link you're drawing?
Well, despite being totally different processes, right? Oil paint versus light capture, both can be incredibly powerful for memory, for storytelling, for expressing a unique viewpoint. A painter chooses their subject, their colors, their composition very carefully to convey something. A photographer who's making photos, They're making similar deliberate choices, and both can tell stories, evoke feelings.
You then shift to cinematography influencing still photography, mentioning Jeff Wall and Gregory Crewdson. Their process sounds more like film production than just, taking a picture. How's that different from, say, street photography?
Oh, it's worlds apart, really. The key is control and planning.
Yeah.
Wall, Crewdson, they build their scenes meticulously. Sets, actors, complex lighting like a movie director,
Right.
street photography, snapshots. That's much more about spontaneity, chance, reacting to what's happening right then and there. Less control, more observation.
But you also note that even snapshots can sometimes have those cinematic qualities, like mood or narrative. You use that David Lynch quote about the room and the light creating a mood, even if the room itself isn't perfect.
Exactly. Yeah, even without all the staging, a simple snapshot can just capture a certain vibe, Or hint at a story through the light, the way things are arranged, maybe someone's expression. We've all seen those casual shots that just hit you with a feeling or make you wonder what's going on just outside the picture.
And you highlight William Eggleston as a master of these photographic moods. His pictures feel like film stills or like places a location scout found. You mentioned one photo, you don't specify which, but you say you can imagine cars going by, people walking past. It really brings that idea to life.
Eggleston was amazing at that, finding the cinematic in the mundane. His pictures of ordinary stuff they're soaked in this specific mood, this sense of an untold story. They invite you to imagine what's happening around the edges.
So this draws a clearer line, then, between snapshots and staged photos regarding narrative. Snapshots, you say, rarely have a narrative intrinsically, but staged photos, because of the time and effort, can attract or suggest narratives, maybe artificial ones, over time. And snapshots aren't necessarily about something specific.
Precisely. Yeah, snapshots grab a moment, usually without a pre-planned story. Their meaning often comes later, tied to personal memory. Staged photos, though, they're often built with an intention. They suggest stories, even if we interpret those stories differently later on. One's a record, the other is more of a construction.
You use that hypothetical example, the snapshot that could have been staged, with actors and a rented vintage car. That really drives home the intentionality behind staged work.
Yeah, that example just highlights the difference between capturing what's there and deliberately building a scene to create a specific feeling or hint at a narrative. The staged photo has that layer of control manipulation even that snapshots usually lack.
Okay, this next part is really cool. The camera as memory theater. You start by saying memory isn't like a movie, it's more like a slideshow, maybe even just one single frame representing an event.
It's intriguing, isn't it? How our brains seem to work. We don't replay life like a film. We recall key moments, often as still images, like mental snapshots.
And you make the point that cameras can sometimes see better than us, capturing details in a still frame from motion that we just miss. Plus this idea of the brain filtering out junk info exformation.
Exactly. Our brains are super efficient filters, gotta be, right? Focusing on what seems important, discarding the rest. A camera, it just records everything in the frame indiscriminately. That shows how selective our own perception and memory really are.
Then you bring in the memory theater concept, this old mnemonic technique using places and objects to remember things. And you link that to photo scouting, saying it's kind of a mnemonic device too. That's a neat parallel.
Yeah, memory theater gives you mental hooks, right? Using familiar spaces to anchor memories. Photo scouting can be similar observing places, encoding them mentally, maybe linking them to future photo ideas or just storing them, creating mental landmarks.
You also mentioned how a photo holds physical traces, optics, light, time, space, and reinforce the brain as a camera obscura, a room for storing memories.
They're both systems for capturing and holding information, aren't they? Though obviously very different. The photo traps light physically. The brain processes input and builds its own internal representations.
And here's where it gets really wild. You say artists like Wall and Crewdson sometimes just observe places, mentally encode them without a camera, and then recreate those memories later in the studio. And you argue this can be more interesting than a snapshot because it's distilled, intentional, focused.
Right. It highlights that the creative act can start way before the click. By really looking, composing in their minds, they can filter their memories and intentions into these incredibly deliberate, narrative-heavy images. It goes beyond just capturing what was there. It's about reconstructing a remembered or imagined scene with purpose.
Which leads us, maybe inevitably, to the question of truth in digital photos. With easy manipulation, that old sense of a snapshot being real get shaky, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, the ease of digital alteration kind of erodes that direct link, that physical trace, the indexical quality we used to associate with photos. You could trust a photo more, perhaps. Now, there's always that potential doubt. It changes how we see photographic evidence, for sure.
You then touch on the fading memory of photos, this transmission loss between the event and the memory of the photo of the event, and how, without captions or context, photo albums just become generic, strangers that look like other people. You mention fungible street memories. Using that Toronto link as an example, a street scene that, without personal ties, is just interesting for seeing the past, the temporal difference.
Yeah, without context or connection, photos get detached, right? They become part of this huge, blurry visual soup. No specifics means they lose their power to trigger distinct memories. That street scene could be anywhere almost. Its value becomes about then versus now, rather than a specific memory.
But then you circle back to this quite elegant idea. Photography is fundamentally about memory, either preserving it, like a snapshot, or activating dormant memories. You mentioned Jeff Wall again, wanting to be a painter recreating scenes from memory. You wrap it up nicely. A snapshot preserves a memory. A staged photo is assembled from memory. And our eyes can be cameras, too, if we look intentionally.
Yeah, I think ultimately, whether it's catching a moment on the fly or carefully building one, it's all tied up with memory. One tries to hold on to the now, the other often reconstructs the then. And underlying it all is just our ability to look, to see, and to store those observations in our minds.
Which brings us to the final, really key question. With everyone having a camera, where does a photographer's unique vision actually live? Beyond just taking the picture. And you end with this powerful thought: artistic vision in photography. It doesn't necessarily even need a camera.
And that kind of brings us full circle, doesn't it? In this image-saturated world, real vision isn't just technical skill or pointing and shooting. It's in the seeing, the interpreting, the communicating something meaningful, whether or not a physical camera is involved in that specific moment of seeing.
If, as you suggest, true artistic vision in photography doesn't always need a camera, then what does it need? How can any of us cultivate that kind of vision just in how we look at the world day to day, even without snapping a photo? What does it really mean for you to truly see